Thank you very much. So yeah, I think this whole business of inclusivity is um, is really important to anybody working in events. I mean, we talk about engagement all the time. Are we engaging? Are we doing all the things that we should be doing when it comes to events? But what if we're not including the people that could be attending? That feels like it's a little bit of a missed opportunity. So today, what we're going to do is just talk about some of the physical aspects, some of the neuro aspects, and also some of the digital side of things, especially with this new legislation that's coming in, which will impact pretty much everyone, regardless of where they're based. And I'll come to that in a moment. But when we're looking about at accessibility, it's really about breaking down any barriers that there are, eliminating barriers so that anyone, regardless of their physical or cognitive abilities, can take part. So we want things that are easy, simple to navigate, whether that's tech or whether that is a physical venue or transportation. So, we've all got a role to play in this. And if we think that it's not really an issue, it's somebody else's concern, I'd say take another thought at that. Just because, according to the World Health Organization, there's an estimated 1.3 billion people, which is about 16% of the global population, that experience some kind of disability. Now, that's a staggering figure, 1.3 billion people. So that's kind of one in six. Um, and the European Council, they basically established that there are something in the region of 87 million people that have some form of disability there. Now, you could think, well, these, people have a disability from birth, but actually they don't. A lot of issues occur as we get older in life. Things happen to us along the way. And according to UK Sport, 80% of people acquire a disability during their lifetime. So back to that earlier point, if we're not looking after people, then we are missing out on a potential opportunity of being able to serve these people in the goods and services that we provide. So that's a kind of outline as to the scale of this issue. I'll come on to the opportunity in a moment, but I really want to get into the European Accessibility Act and what it means for anybody in the event space. It comes into force on the 28th of June this year. So literally in, what's that, 9 days' time, this thing will be in place. Now, it was adopted back in 2019. So European countries have had a time to put it into their national laws, which is what they've been doing. And what it's all about is digital accessibility. So if you just think of digital products, um, websites, apps, all of those kind of lovely things that pretty much every business has got, that's what we're talking about. And it doesn't matter where you're based. So you can be based in the States, you can be based in the UK, you can be based in the Far East. If you are providing goods and services into the European Union, then it has to comply with the requirements of this Accessibility Act. So it's all to do with digital, but it also has a little bit of, it also crosses over into the physical side, because if you imagine that you've got a ticket machine, people still need to be able to reach it. So there is a physical aspect there as well, but it's predominantly digital. And websites, mobile apps, they have to comply with the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which is a bit of a mouthful. There's no easy way of saying it. Some people say WCAG. I think it's better to really spell it out. Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. If you haven't come across those just yet, go into Google, put it in there, and then you will see this whole listing of what's required under the guidelines. And there are different versions that we'll come on to in a minute. But things like websites, mobile apps, they're covered under this act. E-books, e-readers, They have to have supportive technologies like screen readers, e-commerce platforms. So that's pretty much any retailer has to have accessible navigation and for people to be able to transact, spend money easily. Banking services, public transport, and telecoms, they're all affected as well. So they don't, in some of the terminology that they use, it's not really clear exactly what should be covered or shouldn't be, but that's kind of nice because it just means that this is set to cover a broad range of issues. And I think when it comes to events, this will definitely apply to all of the event planners out there that decide that they are going to hold an event in Europe. That means that when they go across to Europe, they have to be complying with these requirements. And their big issue, as most venues would be, is around websites and apps. If we take that as a kind of key starting point, it's not the only one, but it gives us a good kind of way in. In terms of screens and signage and things that you will get at venues as well, these would be things that you'll need to be aware of the guidelines that are coming through. Now, why did they bring this act into place? Simply because they had so many member countries, 20 plus member countries, and they all had different rules. They all had different accessibility standards. So for somebody with a condition, it wasn't easy for them to go from one country to the next and know what should be expected in each. So they've done it with the user in mind, but also for businesses as well. So to be able to comply, you come back to those content accessibility guidelines. If you're doing that, that's all great. The difference is, whilst it's harmonized and it brings all of the digital tech together, harmonizes all of those elements, each of the member states have the ability of putting their own fines and their own penalties on board if an organization isn't compliant. And that can feel a bit strange, but that is um, the way that it's been set up. So the guidelines that come out from the web people, they are global guidelines, but the actual enforcement is done by the national body. So, for example, in Ireland, they take this really seriously. And because they've also said that actually, if you don't do this right, we might actually put people in prison, which is not to scare anybody. But what I'm saying is that whereas before, when we had something like GDPR, it was very clear. It was a percentage of your turnover. That was the amount that you knew that you could be fined if you weren't keeping up to date with the data protection. This is different because it is according to whatever the member has said. But all of these countries are saying, okay, what you need to do is make sure your websites, the screen readers, all of these things are bang up to date. So it's a good catalyst because I think what it's doing is it's really taking it's moving us from really being concerned about physical issues where it's relatively easy to see people with physical impairments. A wheelchair user is fairly straightforward these days, and we know and we've made provision for these kind of things. But this is taking it to a whole new level, and that level is for people that maybe have hearing issues, maybe they've got vision issues, or maybe there is some other condition that they have as well, a neuro condition, which means that everybody sees things through different stages. And what we're doing is we're saying, okay, if you get all of this and you make your venue and you make your event accessible, then you are going to get more people to come. And why wouldn't you want that to happen? So it comes in place very soon. And if you think it's not going to really impact you too much because we're in the UK, that's where we're based, I think what happens is a lot of planners will decide, well, hold on, that goes on over there. Let's see what the venues are doing over here. So this is why we're effectively having this discussion today. And I do want questions because I think that will be useful. And I don't want to drown in any terminology, but when you go into the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, you will find that there are different levels, there are different versions. So they started off a few years ago with version 1, and we are now currently at version 2.2. So 2.2 is the one to have a look at and to see, because it's like when your phone gets upgraded, you get a latest version. So if you think of it though that way, that won't be too far wrong. And they are working on version 3, but that's going to be the next newer version of these guidelines that come out. So it's always evolving, it's always moving. There's always going to be something else to consider. So what's important is to have somebody that's going to keep an eye on this, to find out, to subscribe to the latest updates, to make sure that everything that's being done is that you're not missing out on any things that you should be doing. And if you go into that, you'll find that there are 3 levels as well. There are what they call conformance levels. Level A, which is minimum. Level AA, which is the one that most people are going for. Most organizations are complying with level AA. And then there's treble A, which is as high as you can go. Now, you might say, well, hold on, we want to go for level treble A because that sounds really good, and that will prove that we're really onto everything. But it does have a lot more in the way of additional requirements than AA does. So, for example, with AA, you have to have sign language translation for pre-recorded video content. So if you just think of that for a moment, that is quite something to be able to do. Now, that doesn't fall under the level of AA, which is still strong, but it's less strong. And that, I think, is a midpoint where most people are going. So if people are talking about this subject, they're likely to be talking about version 2.2 AA. And so you'll know that that is just a conformance level, and a 2.2 is a version level. And things that are required, you have to have color contrast between text and background under AA. You have to have clear headings, like you use H1, H2, H3 to have headings. Things like alt text, they have to be on all of the visuals that you use as well. And once you've got that and you know that that's all satisfied, then great, you'll happily be able to carry out business in whichever of those member states that you're involved with. But it's always worthwhile going into the actual individual country and looking to see if there are any additional requirements that they have. So, for example, some countries stipulate that you need to, on your website, have a statement about accessibility. What is your accessibility statement? What are you doing to make sure that you are open to everybody? So this is a moving, it's always going to be moving. It's always going to be evolving in much the same way that a number of other initiatives that we've had in the event space have done as well. What's staggering, I think, is that last year, the Digital Trust Index, they looked at 260,000 homepages of European websites. They just went across sectors. So it wasn't just our sector, it was across all sectors. And of those 260,000, it found that 94% of European websites failed accessibility requirements. And that was in part due to a number of easy things, easy fixes, like the color contrast, like the alt text, links that go nowhere, or buttons that are just not labeled correctly. All of these things were reasons why they actually failed and didn't go there. So if your website is good and it does all of those things, and you can check it because you can go through, there are checkers that enable it to be examined and said, yep, okay, this is good, or it isn't. This is where you can do some remedial work. They're good ways. They're a good sense check of what's going on. And whatever you do, if you was to say, yeah, our website's great, and you've got an app, you've equally got to make sure that the app is also good as well. Because what's been going on over in the States, they've got their regulation, Americans with Disabilities Act, and what's been happening is that some organizations were targeted not just for the website, but for the app as well. So you don't want to get into that kind of mess, really. So that is the act that's coming. But I think that we've all got. I think we need to work together because if we got planners, venues, and other service providers, other tech providers, this is something that we can't just pass on to somebody else and say, okay, this was my piece of responsibility. I think we all have to be coordinated to make make everybody welcome. And it could be that that means that when it comes to venue selection, people are selecting you because they've carried out an accessibility audit. They've had a look to see about, you know, what are you like in terms of helping people with mobility issues, not just for attendees, but also for getting, say, speakers on stage. You can have speakers on stage that might have an hearing issue. So how are they going to be positioned on a panel discussion? How are they going to use your other tech? If you've got to put, and you can be really helpful as venues as well when it comes to talking to planners about this, because one of the big things is that your venue can be perfect when it comes to people coming through the door and making sure that everything is accessible. But if that planner then decides, okay, we're going to go off site for an awards evening, and they haven't considered what that venue is like, they could be in a whole heap of trouble. So it might be that you can help them with some of those issues as well. I think that what this regulation is going to do is going to spur on questions around accessibility, which do come back into the UK. In the UK, we've got the UK Equality Act 2010, which picks up some of this. But I just see it being a catalyst. You know, there's a lot of talk on LinkedIn about inclusion and diversity and everything else that goes around this. And I just think that we are now at a point where this is about to become much more of an issue that becomes every day. It becomes common language. And I think it needs to, because we need to be bringing people on that have got different viewpoints that are able to work in different ways. And if we do, we if we don't do that, we're missing a big opportunity. And that big opportunity is, to my mind, in some of the spending power that there is. Now, I do have some stats, and they are quite significant. In the UK, spending power of households with one disabled person, they estimate at 274 billion per year. Think of that number. That's a huge number. In the USA, there was an Open Doors market study, and that said that over the last 2 years, 25.6 million travelers with disabilities made 76.9 million trips and spent nearly $50 billion. So we got a community here that is wanting to spend money to to planners and venues and other service suppliers that really understand accessibility. So I think if you're not, you know, looking at, okay, it might cost us some outlay to make us accessible and ready for this. There's a huge opportunity there that's being missed. So that's why I gave the big stats right at the very top of this presentation. And when it comes to simple things like, you know, when you go onto a site and you want to buy a ticket or something, well, Clickaway Pound, they did a survey back in 2019, and the amount of business that was lost because people did click away, they figured out was 17.1 billion pounds. So that is a huge amount of people that are abandoning shopping carts just because it's too difficult, it's not easy to navigate, or it's not set up for them. So I think that's a good reason why all of these things that are coming through from the European Act are going to make a change to the way that we look at things. And not least, if you think, well, where do you want your brand to be seen? Where do you want your venue or your product, your service to be? Do you want to be a brand that is inclusive of people and accessible? Or do you want to be one that's kind of, okay, well, no, we're doing fine. That's down to somebody else to do. Because I think even if there wasn't litigation that's coming in, it would make absolute sense for, for us to be more empathy wise, I guess, in terms of how we're looking at people that have got different perspectives and different requirements. So, and that I think is also where we're going to be heading as well, in terms of looking at, well, how damaging is it to a brand that is, I know, fined or in the papers because it didn't do something that it could have been doing. So, yeah, it is quite interesting as to where this regulation will take us. And I think looking into this, the crystal ball, it's going to be very much a case of there is already legislation across the globe for various countries, and there's going to be more of it. I think what this particular act is doing is really saying, okay, let's bring this whole body of Europe together. And you might think, well, we're not really in, in the UK, we're not in it. We haven't heard too much about it. And I agree. It's a very different scenario that we find ourselves in compared to, say, when the GDPR regulation came out a few years ago, because at that time we were in the European Union and it was clear and obvious and there was lots of information about it. Less so this time. You can go to the European Commission website and find quite a lot of information on there, but you do have to sift through it. You do have to sift through some of their directives. So what we've done here is pull out some of those main points to give you this. But I would strongly recommend wherever you are going, whichever country, have a look, see what their requirements are, so that that all makes sense. But get to grips with these guidelines. And if you think that, I'm just posting up a picture, alt text, yeah, I haven't got time for that. I think just make time. It doesn't take very long to say, this is a picture of an audience looking at a speaker on blah, blah, blah stage or whatever it happens to be. The more that you get into the habit of doing that, the better it's going to be. And just testing all of the links and where they're going will be huge things that make a big difference and don't put you in that pile of the 94% of websites that didn't quite cut it. So I think this is an issue that some people say, well, we don't, where do we start? I think you start by just having a look at those guidelines, having a look at what the country requires, and then start looking at any gaps that there are. But also, it's to encourage people. Maybe there's somebody in the organization that can be a champion for this to start with. Maybe you've already got them, but the more that it's ingrained in the way that an organization works and runs, the better it's going to be in the long term. So that is a whistle stop of what I wanted to cover today. But I'm very happy to take questions, because we're in this and it's an ongoing, evolving situation. And the more that we can all learn from each other and each other's experiences, I think that will be the better for all of us.